So, John, could we venture into a little more quasi-spiritual arena about your
Absolutely.
book, Clear
Absolutely.
Hearers?
Oh,
Because
clear
this,
here.
yeah, this is close to my heart because this is from another dimension
Mhm.
coming to our dimension.
Yeah.
Speak
Clear
of
here is my book, which is basically an investigative file on all the cases that I have studied, including the cases in my own family growing up, of these people that hear don't hear, they perceive a clear voice of authority that comes to them and helps them during times of crisis, during times when their lives may be in danger, and and that's what it's all about. And I go through a lot of my own family history, uh, because clear hearing is something that, and it's also something that many historical figures have heard. The original phrase "clear hearing" was a French phrase, which is clairaudient, which is a French term that comes from Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, who supposedly was the first clear hearer, the first clairaudient, who perceived these in the 14th century. She was a 15-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl, who this clear voice of authority came to her at a time when France was almost excised out of existence. It was 90% erased by the English, and this voice that Joan of Arc described it as being the voice of Mother Mary came to her and told her what she was going to do to save France, how she was going to come forward and become famous and help France come back and not be destroyed. And that's exactly what happened. And so Joan of Arc is supposedly known as the first clear hearer. And this is very different from voice hearing. Voice hearing is a condition that people get where they hear these muddled, confused voices, and it's considered a medical condition to be treated with drugs. So voice hearing is completely different from clear hearers, what clear hearers do. So yeah, that's my book, Clear Hearers, and it's a totally new area of the paranormal that people have probably not been exposed to previously, even though there are many people who are themselves clear hearers and just haven't really leaned into it
Yeah,
until now.
you had some experiences with that.
Yes, yes, I had on my own. I had some experiences with that, for sure. I had several of them, as a matter of fact. I had, well, when I was an FBI agent, I'll tell you, I had an experience where I went to meet with somebody, an individual that was developing as an informant, to give information on uh, on known terrorists. And he himself was a person of Arabic descent, who was a person who had had a lot of involvement with jihadis and with terrorist individuals. But he was supposedly a very patriotic uh, person who had had several meetings with me in the past. And this particular and he had an office. He had an office that had a lot of empty desks in it, and it was kind of like a front, and I don't know what his real business was, because there was no activity going on in this front office. So, but there was a wall mirror behind it, and so when he would go to the back, he would welcome me in all the time to have our little meetings to talk, and then he would go in the back. So one time I went to his main desk, and I rifled through the desk to just see what I could find out. And I rifled through it, and in it I found a curved ceremonial dagger called a kirpak, a curved ceremonial dagger that was very elaborate handle, very nice. But I noticed even though it was ceremonial, I noticed that it had what appeared consistent with dried blood on the blade, on the curved blade of this particular dagger. And underneath it was a picture of the subject, the person I was visiting, with some famous politician. I think it was like Dick Cheney. And then I put the dagger back. I heard him coming. I closed the door. I closed the drawer, and I just went back. And then we had our meeting. Well, then I was pretty comfortable with this guy, and even though I had checks out for him, what we call background checks, which are a little difficult with a person who has spent most of their lives in the Soviet Union, in the republics, not the Soviet Union, but the outer republics that were part of Soviet Union. But you can do those checks, and they take a long time to come back. So one time I was leaving, and this is in my book, Clear Hearers, under the heading, Your Day to Die. And so I came back this one time. I was coming through the double doors, and he saw me, and he just stayed by that desk where I had been the week before, rifling through it. He stayed by that desk, and he yelled out at me, come on in. And I tried to go through his front doors to come in for our meeting, and all of a sudden I just heard this wave of sound from the back of my head, and I didn't hear it, I just perceived it. And it just said, do not go in there. And suddenly my legs locked up. They locked up. And I was pushing on the doors, and I said, and I was struggling to move my legs. And then the voice came again. It just said, do not go in there. And so he was yelling out at me to come in. And I was telling him, I started yelling back at him, I don't think I can come in today. I have an emergency. I have to, because I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't move in to get there. And I was pushing the doors open, and I was trying to move my legs. And then a third time, the voice came, do not go in there. And so I just said, I'm sorry, I'm leaving. And I told him, and he just started screaming at me. No, just a second. I just need you to come in for a second. And behind him was a walled mirror. It was there since it was always there, a walled mirror. And I could see that he had that curved dagger was in the back of the small of his back. And he was holding it back there. And I could see it in the mirror. And so I told him, I'm sorry. I'm leaving. I got to go. I had an emergency. I can't come in. And then the last things, and then I pushed myself back, and my legs were fine. They unlocked. I could move my legs again, and I was happy because I thought I might be having a stroke. So as soon as I moved backwards, my legs were fine. I could move, and I was fine. And so I told him, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going. And the last words I heard from him was he's screaming out, just 1 second. All I need is 1 second. And the doors closed, and I left. Now, and then the following week, all the checks came back on him from overseas and showed that one of the aliases that were attached to his name and was an individual who specialized in killing Soviet police officers with a dagger. That was one of the identities that came back to him, to the name that he had used. And so when I went back again with other FBI agents, everything was cleaned out. Everything had been sanitized. He had rented everything under fake identities anyway. And there was not even a hair, not even a speck of dust was in that area. So he had cleared out. And then I knew that he had planned to kill me that day. That was his entire thing, over months that I had been developing a relationship with him. That was his plan all along. So that's one of my clear hearing experiences. That's pretty typical.
May I
saved your life.
Yeah, exactly.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably have a certain intuitive, right, sense being an investigator. Prior to finding the dagger, did you have any intuition about him? And thank God you're so protected. I mean, I'm so happy. Yeah.
No, prior to finding the dagger, he was a very friendly, gregarious, very enthusiastic individual who was very enthusiastic about helping me, giving me information about terrorists, and also about communists. He was like a rabbit against communism and against jihadis as well. So he was completely sincere. But what we find is sometimes these people who cooperate with us and help us, sometimes they also have family members back home that are under pressure from wherever they came from. So they have to do things that they're told to do. And that's one of the ways in which their own countries, their own governments continue to control them even after they're in America. So I think that's what happened in this particular case also. And so yeah, I didn't have any intuition that this guy was anything but good. And I think in the book I used the name Kartos for him. Kartos. It's not his true name, but that's how you could find that experience, and it was pretty wild.
And again, I love that you are so protected wherever the clear hearer voice comes from, or impression or whatever comes from. How can we? I mean, I've occasionally had directives that have led me to the right place at the right time. I would always attribute it to intuition, but especially with the impending fake invasion that's going to come, how can we discern what's real and what's fake, and how can we protect ourselves from getting all emotionalized and adrenalinized by this fake invasion? Like, is there something that we can do consciousness-wise? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, you have to do your meditations, you have to do your meditation exercises, and to feel that still small voice, which is also called your intuition. And it's not a voice at all. It's that little sort of prompting that is planted inside your solar plexus by your creator. And it is there always, and it always gives you a prompting. And we call it the still small voice, but it's really just a feeling that always tells you which way to go, what you should do. And because we're cluttered with so much technology, so many of us are not in touch with that still small voice, but it's always there, and it always helps you and guides you and directs you. And people need to practice listening to it and then see the good results that they get when they do. And that would go a long way towards helping our intuition and helping what we need to do in order to be ready for these fake incidences that are going to be occurring. Because I can promise you, Nori, on a personal level, that when these things happen to you, whether it's fake alien invasion or any other, I don't like to say the government psychological operations, let's say, when you see these things done on a massive scale, you're always going to get a feeling that this is BS. This is BS. This is not, and it's always gonna be there. It's gonna be there in your solar plexus. It's gonna be in there, and you just need to stop and say, I know what I feel. I know what I'm experiencing. And when all the other government voices of authority, come to you, say, no, forget about what you think. You have to listen to us. We're the ones telling you. We're NASA. And we're making this announcement. Well, but you still haven't explained why we didn't go back to the moon after 1972. I mean, you still haven't given us any explanation of why we suddenly stopped in 1972 traveling to the moon. Nothing. That's never been, and yet you're going to be here telling us, oh, I have an announcement today. We found an underground lake. There's an underground lake in Mars. Why would we trust anything that these government affiliated authorities tell us when they won't even cover basic realities that we already know about and give us some answers on those?
And the the suggestions that you're giving, to listen to the voice, to calm yourself, do they, all the three letters and, the I word and stuff, do they bank on our emotionalism? Do they bank on keeping us off balance because we can get so emotional?
Yes, that's that's always factored into what they do. That's one of the reasons for the War of the Worlds exercise that occurred in this country in the 50s, I think, was to gauge that sort of sentiment. And that was government operation, government psychological operation, to gauge and measure how much fear and panic is able to be engendered and then to be exploited in the population. And they know that they always factor that in for a certain result that they want. And so we have to be able to distinguish when it's fake and listen to our own intuition on these matters.
Mm-hmm. I always go back to, okay, what do I believe and is this real? So I don't want to blow smoke, but you are truly amazing. A child from New York, I'm a fellow New Yorker, but you are not the usual spiritual consciousness prototype, right? You don't have, incense burning, and you're brilliant. So what about you?
Thank you.
What do you believe? Yeah.
I believe that anything that is in human consciousness for a certain period of time without being extinguished is most likely actually real. So that if you see something, no matter what the forces of government authority or any authorities say, I believe that things that people consider are real are usually they also have a spiritual perception, and they know something is good or something is bad. If you go through an alien contact experience, you immediately have a spiritual perception that something good is happening or something bad is happening. And both happen all the time. There are people who have alien experiences and it's just nothing but dread. And that means those are malevolent alien visitors. But there's people who see nothing but positive. There's people who had their diseases healed. There's people who have seen nuclear missiles shut down by UFOs. That, to me, that's a benevolent result. That's something. So they're trying to convey something that is trying to help humanity. See, so these positive and negative experiences, they go on all the time, both types. And your spiritual perception is always right. It's always right. So we need to practice it like a muscle, practice it and exercise it and use it, because you will be right, but usually in our society, that gets drowned out. That gets drowned out by technology and by the voices of authority, the regular voices of authority that come after and tell you, no, this is what's really happening. They gaslight us.
Yes. Wow. We were just talking about consciousness and our spiritual practices and our consciousness practices, how important it is. And, out there in the spiritual community, the people who may not necessarily, be focusing on ufology or things like that, there is a whole movement of people who believe that if they can raise their level of consciousness to the vibration of love, which is a wonderful, right, goal, that they can affect some change in the world, in the cosmos, in humanity. What do you think about that?
I think that may be possible. It's anything. There is an unseen world that's underneath the physical world that has big consequences in the physical world. And anything that has to do with positive prayer, positive meditation, can move mountains in this world, in our world. And so we need to always practice those things. Jesus said, pray always, and in all things pray. Well, you can't, how can you really literally pray always? You know, we would say that we can't, but there is a state of mind that we can teach ourselves to where we are kind of in meditation always and praying always. And it takes a lot of work, but we start one step at a time. And so, yeah, I think that kind of stuff is important, is very important to do and to practice like a muscle, to always practice it. And, you know, we were also, Nori, we were talking about technologies and how to distinguish a lot of these false operations that are going to be happening against us probably pretty soon. There's been, and one of the things that we need to do is that we need to be aware. In my book, The Clear Hearers, I talk about the fact that there is scalar technology right now it's called voice of God technology that allows, and the problem is the nations have this. This is not with the secret space program. The nations actually have this tech right now, and they use it sometimes against targeted individuals. And what it does is it beams, I believe it's scalar technology. It beams sounds, well, it's vibrations really, but it's perceived as sound, directly to the skull of individuals, and it can make them hear anything the device operator wants them to hear. So we, at this point, we have and this technology has been used. It's been in the news. I think at the Cuban embassy, it was used along with microwave tech that was used, and it was used by the Russians, I believe. And this stuff is extraordinary. And so we're at a point where they have the ability, the blue beam technology, to make let's say Jesus appear in the sky, and also to beam his voice into your skull directly. And if you don't have the developed spiritual perception, like we were just talking about, like you're just talking about, Nori, practicing that sort of, that ability, those exercises, then you're going to be screwed. You're going to be screwed because you're going to believe a lot of these false ops are real, along with the rest of the herd that is in that mainstream bubble and listens to the authorities. And that's going to be fatal. That's going to be fatal for a large segment of the population. Listen, here's something that I have to put a lot of these things into articles and get them out on the net. But here's one thing that occurred. It's a good parable to tell you of all these things we've been discussing. When the World Trade Center in 2001, when the World Trade Center was being taken down by next level technology, and we were being told that these terrorists were taking them down with airplanes. When that was occurring, here's a strange phenomenon that happened in every one of those buildings that went down on that day in 2001. And this happened over and over again. We have anecdotal evidence from these incidences. And there were about 4 World Trade Centers that were involved that day that all went down, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this particular incident occurred in every one of those buildings. There was towards the beginning of the incident, when supposedly there were the explosions or the planes, depending on what you believe, that struck the buildings, and there was just those first initial vibrations and explosions were heard in all of the buildings, in all 4 of the World Trade Center buildings, and they were felt. And so here's what happened in every one of those buildings. There was a rush of a crowd of people that came down to the lobby, and it was usually a crowd of workers. It was a crowd of workers and office workers and managers, even managers and clerical workers, all types, legal people, all kinds of people. They would rush down to the lobby, and every time they were confronted with the same sight. A group of security guards that had received the same instructions, and a group of security guards that went in front of the crowd as they were rushing down the elevators and rushing out of and trying to leave the lobby. They came forward. They said, put their hand up and say, folks, hold on. You know what? There's nothing really going on. We haven't declared an emergency. There's nothing happening. And guys, you can go back up to your offices. It's not a big deal. Everything's secure. You're safe, secure. Go on back up to your offices. And in every one of those crowds, there was like one independent thinker. Sometimes it was an older Black woman office manager. In one incident, in one other time, it was the president of one of the major firms in there. Another time, it was actually a janitorial, senior janitorial staff, a lady who was Hispanic in one of the other buildings. And in another case, it was always somebody older, just the way it turned out. And that person inevitably stood out in the crowd and said, "What the hell are you talking about? Get out of our way. Get out of our way." And the crowd surged forward and left the building. That happened in every one of those 4 buildings. And if that one person hadn't spoke up, if that one person hadn't called the authority on the carpet and said, this is complete BS. You know, what you're saying is nonsense, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're right, but the margin of error is too great, and we need to get out of this building. Let us out. And it didn't matter if they had a bunch of walkie-talkies and and maybe like some mace on their belt, and and maybe a taser. There's just one person who could listen to their own spiritual perception, like we were talking about, Nori, who knew what they saw, knows what they're experiencing, and it's not going to be gainsayed by some security guards who are just following orders of who knows who. And so that's a really important parable for us to know about and talk about, because we all need to be that individual, that older Black lady in that crowd who stood up and said, "You guys are full of crap. Get out of our way right now." And in some instances, they actually physically pushed aside the security guards.
That goes along with your saying about, "I know what I saw."
Yeah, exactly.
It's a knowing. It's a knowing in here.
Yeah. But what if that crowd hadn't had that one independent thinker? What if we would have had a lot more deaths that day than 3,000? It would have been maybe more like 30,000 if that one independent thinker hadn't been in that lobby, in that crowd, who just had the courage of their convictions to say, "I'm not going to listen to authorities. I'm not going to be gaslit. I'm going to do what I know in my heart is real and true." Yeah.
And in keeping with the what do I believe, I know what I know regarding the World Trade Center. My father was the head foreman for the elevator company, the unionized elevator company, and he took me up in the Trade Center when it was just superstructure. So he knew those buildings like he knew the back of his hands. And here he was, 80 something years old, in his late 80s, watching them go down. And he said to me, "They don't go down like that." Mm-hmm. And that will forever stay with me, forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll see if we ever find out the real story on that. And who knows, because we're in a war right now. We're all caught up in a war, even if we don't know it. Every single person's life is going to be touched by this war, and it's the war of these new nationalist, populist, political forces that are trying to overthrow the elite powers in control. that are trying to overthrow the people who created the 9/11 incident, who created the jihadis and the war on terror, who created all these distractions that are occurring, that they need always. And you always need the global distraction going on, whether it's the Soviets versus the communists versus the Western world, or they need the radical jihad versus the Western world, and now they're going to need the alien, bad aliens versus the world. And they always need that because they don't want to lose control of their mainstream and have them actually stop, take a breath, and look up and say, who's really controlling all this stuff? What's really going on here?
Yeah. Wow.
I'm thinking too that from what I see, I think 50 years from now, government as a managing structure of people, we outdated. Chances are that we get more of a resource management type of thing and let people manage their own affairs. Now that will be something to wait for.
Yeah. But in the meantime, you have the globalist elites are taking down off of the social media, Twitter, YouTube, all the services. They're taking down anyone who is libertarian, anybody who is conservative, I guess, in voice, or anyone who is exopolitics in nature. They're just taking them down because they're trying to strike back and enforce censorship against us so that we can't talk to each other and we can't hear each other. So
I think they're shooting themselves in the foot, though.
Oh, yeah? Why
Because
is that?
I think what it's going to do is it's catalyst. It's going to spur people to say, now just wait a minute. We've got this hegemony with Google, Facebook, et cetera, these tech giants. I think somebody's going to say that I got deep pockets and I want to make my own platform and rise up. Like you've got Minds starting to kind of come together. There's a few other platforms that are starting to come up. I think competition is going to start. I think it's going to force people to say, you know what, I want to try something different. So,
good. I hope you're right. I really
we can only hope, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I really do.
You're so amazing on so many levels, but I just want to bring it back to the human level for a moment as we end and ask you, what's your greatest joy?
My greatest joy is being, going to these conferences, meeting people in public, and then having them come up to me and tell me that an experience that I talk about in one of my books is absolute corroboration for them and great comfort for them in their own experience, something that they went through, and something that is important to them so that they know what they saw, so that they can be sure that they know what they went through is real. I have in my latest book, The Clear Hearers, I recount an experience of actually meeting my mother after she passed away, and it was something that was an experience, a lucid experience. It was like a vision, and it was something that really happened. It was a reality that was way overdue because she had passed away 10 years previous, and I had gotten no contact from her despite her being a very powerful psychic when she was alive. So I was very disappointed in that. And then 10 years later on the anniversary, I got contact from her, and she sat down with me and explained to me all this stuff about where she is, and it's an amazing experience. And I was just really happy when people were able to say to me that they had similar experience, and that it was just a great comfort to them to know that their experience was validated by what I wrote in my book as well. That's my greatest joy. Yeah, I really do. In
the meantime, everybody needs to read all your books.
Yes, my books are available on Amazon, The Clear Hearers, The Extra Dimensionals in particular, even the Para Investigators, where I do a lot of explanation about evidence and proof, and I give examples of many cases in law enforcement that had to do with the paranormal. and the real
There
X
we
Files.
are.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Oh, hold them up again, Augie. Where are they? There we go. That's it. Okay.
and when,
So
when are the X-Men, right, the true X-Files coming out? I
I don't know. We're working on it.
Oh, good.
We're working on it. I'm always working with television companies, production companies, and so we're always in the middle, in the midst of that sort of thing. But as for a deadline, it's always touch and go with deadlines and that sort of thing. And also, my website is John Tama Books. Sorry for the clicking. John Tama Books, and I have a conference coming up in Irvine, California, coming up October 5th, 6th, and 7th. And it will be really something that is coming up. That's going to be a big conference with some really important people with some breaking news in these areas that we've been talking about. And it's going to be, I'm going to have Jordan Schaefer will be there, Teresa Yanaros, Grant Cameron, and many, many others. That should be really, really something in Irvine.
Beautiful. And thank you. I mean, thank you for what you do, and thank the Creator that you are so protected so that you can just go on and continue this work and continue with your foundation. And maybe we'll get to see you in October. That would be fabulous.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Really.
Thank you so much, John Desouza. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thanks, Augie. Thanks, Nori. Thanks so much, guys. Awesome.